Hi, this is Dr. Gregory Sadler. I'm a professor of philosophy and the president and founder of an educational consulting company called Reason.io, where we put philosophy into practice. I've studied and taught philosophy for over 20 years, and I find that many people run into difficulties reading classic philosophical texts. Sometimes it's the way things are said or how the text is structured. But the concepts themselves are not always that complicated, and that's where I come in. To help students and lifelong learners, I've been producing longer lecture videos and posting them to YouTube. Many viewers say they find them useful. What you're currently watching is part of a new series of shorter videos, each of them focused on one core concept from an important philosophical text. I hope you find it useful as well. When studying Cicero's work on the nature of the gods, which is quite long, has 3 books, or if you like, chapters to them, it may be helpful from the beginning to have kind of an overview in your mind about what is actually happening in it. And officially we can call this a dialogue if you expect it to be like Platonic dialogues where there's a bit more back and forth in the structure of the work. You might be a little bit disappointed. It tends to be more discourses that are set up and then carried out in relation to each other, one after the other, responding to each other. But it is dialogical, you can say, in that the various people, the characters, are expressing points of view that are placed in relation with each other, and this is a reflection of Cicero's own practice and his commitments to academic skepticism. Now, academic skepticism, the skepticism of the new academy, was not just going around and saying, I doubt this, I suspend my belief. It played different philosophies off against each other. So in order to be a good academic skeptic, you couldn't just buy into the skeptical school and isolate yourself from the others. You actually had to have studied other points of view. And Cicero actually talks a little bit earlier about having studied with Diodotus, Philo, Antiochus, Posidonius, different members, superlative members of different philosophical schools at the time. And he says that I'm going to lay before my readers the doctrines or the ideas, the sententias of the various schools on the nature of the gods. And he says we're going to look at these. Maybe we can arrive at some sort of consensus. And what he does is argue for and against all the schools on a particular topic. Now, does he actually get to all of the schools? We'll see that that's not exactly the case. But this topic of the nature of the gods, he says, is quite important. Why? Because, if we can't figure out anything about this, he says that there are pretty serious implications for a whole bunch of other matters. He brings up religion, piety, and holiness, which he had invoked earlier, things we need to get clear about. Ritual, what we actually do. Honor, whether we should show honor to the gods. Loyalty to oaths. Temples, shrines, sacrifices, auspices, or augury. All of these sorts of matters depend on what we think the gods are, or if we even think that the gods do exist or not, something that there's been controversy about. So he's going to arrange a little meetup, and the way that he sets this up is pretty typical. I'm going to joke a little bit here. An Epicurean, a Stoic, and a Skeptic walk into a bar, sort of the structure of many jokes. So Cicero's not actually joking, but it does have that sort of structure to it. He says, this has often struck me, but it did so with a special force on one occasion, when the topic of the immortal gods was made the subject of a very searching and thorough discussion. So searching accurate, they searched in a very, comprehensive manner, and thorough, diligenter. They were devoting themselves to it. They weren't just
BSing around. They weren't dilettantes. They're actually having an earnest conversation, a disputatum est. They are discussing it. They are debating with each other at the house of this guy, Cotta, who is going to become one of the main characters in the dialogue. And I mentioned that they don't have an Aristotelian there. So, he says that I ran into these guys, and Cotta says, you come at exactly the right moment. I'm just engaging in a dispute on an important topic. And so Cicero says, yeah, I've come at the right moment. Here are you, 3 leaders of 3 schools of philosophy met in Congress. In fact, we only want Marcus Piso to have every considerable school represented. Now, Piso is somebody that there's kind of a backstory to. He was a friend of Cicero, and then later they fall out. And interestingly, he's going to be representing the missing Aristotelian or peripatetic position. And then Cotta says something here, which is a bit of a side note. He says, if what is said in the book, which our master Antiochus lately dedicated to our good Balbus here is true, you have no need to regret the absence of your friend Piso. Antiochus holds the view that the doctrines of the Stoics, they differ in form of expression, but agree in substance with that of the peripatetics, the Aristotelians. And so Balbus says, well, that's nonsense. The Aristotelians and the Stoics don't actually hold the same point of view. A bit of a side note, but something that comes up in other Ciceronian texts. So if Cotta were here, he could represent the Aristotelian position, and the implication is that the Aristotelian position really is different from the Stoic position. So not every doctrine has been discussed. Be that as it may, we do have 3, as Cicero has said, 3 important masters of key schools that are discussing this. And so who are these? So we've got Gaius Velleius, who represents the Epicurean school. The Epicureans begin, as do all of these other schools, in Greece. Romans are attracted to them. Gaius Velleius is one of the people who studied Epicurean texts. Now, we don't actually have, unfortunately, most of what Epicurus wrote. That's all been lost, but Velleius apparently, and Cicero himself, would have had access to that. Then we have Quintus Lucilius Balbus, who, as it says here, was so accomplished a student of Stoicism as to rank with leading Greek exponents of that system. So that's really good too. We can trust Cicero that Balbus is presenting to us the Stoic position on the matter. And as a matter of fact, as a side note, if we didn't have this text, we would be missing a lot of Stoic cosmology and theology, which we know largely through this work. Then we have, of course, Gaius Cotta himself, who is the householder, and he is representing the Skeptic school, which Cicero belongs to. So Cicero himself doesn't have to, as he does in some of his dialogues, take the position of the skeptic. He can just sit back and record and tell us what happened, allowing us to observe the interplay between all 3 of these important schools of philosophy. So, what happens in the work? In Book 1, Velleius gets to speak. Usually when Cicero is doing this sort of thing, the Epicureans get to go first, not least because Cicero considers them the weakest of the schools when we actually look at their doctrines, and usually they're going to be refuted. So Velleius criticizes other philosophers. You guys have got it all wrong, especially the Stoics. He singles them out for some considerable discussion, and then he is going to present the Epicurean perspective on the nature of the gods. And he'll actually provide one argument for the existence of gods, what we often call the argument from common consent, and then he'll explain how the Epicureans think the gods, exist, what their form is, are they active, do they care about things? So that is the Epicurean point of view getting expressed there. And it's rather short by comparison to the Stoic point of view. And then Cotta is going to criticize the Epicurean point of view. And this is, again, very typical of Cicero's works. One side gets to present their point of view and do so in a systematic manner. The other side gets to criticize it point by point by point, perhaps also bringing in some other things as well. So we get in Book 1, presentation and criticism, two sides of the same matter, looking at the Epicurean point of view. Then we move on to Book 2, which is, you could say, more substantive. And Balbus is getting to talk through all of this and to present the Stoic perspective in a quite complex way. He provides explanations and arguments. Some of these have to do with the existence of the gods. He's going to provide more and better arguments than what Velleius did as an Epicurean. He's also going to present a number of really important ideas, like the notion of there being degrees of being, starting from bare being, plant being, animal being, rational human being, the gods above us. He's going to engage in some, we could call it cosmology, telling us how the gods actually do things within the universe that they actually care about, how they're connected to, you could say, God per se. And so this is a presentation of what we often call the Stoic cosmology or theology. And again, just to remind us, if we didn't have this, we would have a few other important discussions, but this is absolutely central for understanding Stoic theology. Then we're also going to get from Balbus some further criticism of the Epicurean position from the point of view of a Stoic. So we're not going to get too much of Epicureanism after that. I should also mention one other thing that's being discussed here that's going to come up in Book 3. So the Stoics not only had a whole bunch of arguments, explanations, ideas about the gods, they also had to make sense out of what it was that the poets, the myths and legends and all of this sort of stuff, what is that about? Are the gods actually like this? And like Socrates, the Stoics held that the gods didn't do a lot of the things that people are attributing to them, because those would be unbecoming of gods. So these must be allegories, as opposed to the Epicureans, who said those just are superstitions, false stories completely. They have no idea what the gods are like, these people that are spreading these ideas and engaging in tragedies or writing epics. The Stoics are saying, well, they're literally false, but they can be understood to be allegorically true. So that is the end of Book 2. Book 3, we get the Skeptic again. Cotta is going to examine bit by bit the position that has been put forth by Balbus as a Stoic, and he's going to go on to also criticize this allegorizing, and he's going to say, listen, by the very end, we don't really know. You guys have put forth some interesting arguments, but none of us have attained to the certainty and security that we really want. And that's too bad, because I myself am involved in these religious matters. So that's kind of an issue here. And what we're going to see at the very end, at the conclusion, is that Cotta is going to say, my goal isn't to tear everything down. He says, this more or less is what I have to say about the nature of the gods. It's not my design to disprove it, but to bring you to understand how obscure it is and how difficult to explain. We don't have we all agree now philosophically things have to be this way. And then we get something interesting. Lucilius the Epicurean says, You have indeed made a slashing attack on the most reverently and wisely constructed Stoic doctrine. As evening is now approaching, you will assign us on a day to make our answer to your views. I have to fight against you on behalf of altars and hearths, the temples and shrines of the gods, and the city walls, which you as pontiffs declare to be sacred and are more careful to hedge the city round with religious ceremonies than even with fortifications. And my conscience forbids me to abandon the cause so far as I can breathe. So the Epicurean here is doing something kind of non-Epicurean, saying, yeah, all those superstitions that you guys have, I guess I'm going to have to argue for that. That's not going to happen in this discussion. Maybe he's joking. Maybe he isn't. We don't really know. Cotta says, I just would love to be refuted. My purpose was to discuss the doctrines rather than to pronounce judgment on them. So, disputave dicere malui quam judicare, he says. And then Velleius at the end is actually going to say that Cotta's discourse seems to be truer. Where does Cicero himself sit on this? So Cicero belongs to the academic school. Does he actually favor the academic in this? We find out no. He says, for my part, I felt that Balbus's discourse approximated more nearly propensior to not the truth, but a semblance of the truth, ad veritatis similitudinem. Isn't that interesting? Cicero says, I don't really know. It is pretty important that we do know about this stuff, but I don't know. But I incline towards Balbus's Stoic discourse rather than the person from my own school who, if everything was party line, he should be favoring that guy. So a very, very interesting and complex dialogue constructed here with interplay between three important philosophical schools of antiquity. We can just imagine what it would be like if an Aristotelian was actually in the mix, but as we see, he's not. So that is the structure, and those are the main characters, each representing a particular point of view involved in this work.